still believe that the vaccines are toxic and a target by the whites to kill the children in the future. Of course, what we did point out to in our conversation with regards to, could there be another motive with regards to the same? So thank you so much for your views. As I wrap this up, before I link to Mr. Romeo on the other side of the studio, we do have Kipsanga Eliud Mwana. On Facebook, you're telling me careless medical personnel. It is allegedly reported that a pupil has died in one of the primary schools in Queen District, of course, just after an infection or injection by a nurse during the mass immunization program. Keep your views coming on #morning@NTV. Like I said, you can also tag your followers, yes, and your influence on social media. Just tag everyone that you can on #morning@NTV so they can jump on this conversation. Yeah, let's have this going. #morning@NTV. Let me link to Romeo Busiko right now. He's on standby with yet another interesting conversation that you cannot afford to miss out on. Romeo.
Oh, thank you very much, Mala, for that. Well, you can keep those comments coming in with regards to the immunization campaign that is being shunned by some parents based on various reasons. Some cultural beliefs, some based on Christianity beliefs, but then it doesn't hold water. Please, vaccination actually really works. Let's now get into our next conversation of the day. Collapsing buildings in Uganda. We want to know what is happening. Now, earlier this week, one person was confirmed dead, another injured, and rushed to hospital in critical condition after a building collapsed in Bakuli, Rubaga Division in Kampala. Now, the Kampala Metropolitan Deputy Police spokesperson, Mr. Luke Owoyesigire, said 4 others were feared trapped in that rubble following the accident that happened at around 10 a.m. on Friday. But this was not the first time a building collapsed in Kampala. There was even that Daily Monitor article, I think you remember it, on the men behind collapsed buildings. The blame always ends up at the door of the architects and the engineers. So today, we have an architect to answer our questions on why buildings are collapsing. To answer our questions, we have Mr. Andrew Amara, the Chairman, Research and Development at the Uganda Society of Architects, and he joins me right now in studio. Good morning and many thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Now, just like any other African countries, Uganda is so blessed as a nation that we rarely ever experience natural disasters such as earthquakes and tornadoes. Now, the irony is that despite the absence of these natural disasters, our buildings are still collapsing. Andrew, what could be the problem?
Well,
and why is this happening?
Well, it's unfortunate, and it's a variety of reasons. In the case of Bakuli, well, the rains loosened up the soil. And of course, on the part of the developers and the contractor, there was some negligence. And of course, the police is still investigating to find out what the real cause was. But the problem is much bigger than that. At the different stages along the building chain, so many things go wrong. First of all, developers many times neglect contacting professionals. You have a vision for a building and you don't engage an architect or an engineer. And then some don't even get building permission. Many times you need to go to the town council and seek permission. There are others who actually bribe their way through permission, so the plans are never really looked at in detail. And then when you go to the building site, is your construction work being supervised? Do you have the right people supervising your work? Do you have the right team? I mean, you shouldn't get somebody who has done a single-story building to do a four-story tower. In the case of Bakuli, they were cutting down into the soil, a couple of meters down. And this is a very tedious and complex task, and it needs to be done very well. You need to hold up your soil, you need to shore it up. So you find that a number of things have gone wrong within the building chain. And developers and even the public sometimes get it wrong.
And indeed, things have been going wrong at least since 2014. We've been realizing at least 3 buildings collapsing from 2014 to 2018. That's roughly 12 buildings in the last 4 to 5 years. Now, please tell us, what is government doing to avert this?
Well, about 10 years back, the government wrote a national construction policy. And under that policy, a Building Control Act was written in 2013. And last year, thankfully, it was signed into law, and now it's in effect. So what this Building Control Act does, it sets up a national building review board at the national level. And then at a district level and at municipal level, you have building control committees, so building committees. And then each district will have a building control officer who's supposed to come out there and monitor the construction and inspect building sites at different levels. But we also have a variety of other agencies that look into the building sector. For example, NEMA makes sure that you don't build in the wrong places, in wetlands. UNRWA, of course, is preserving our road reserves. At the different municipal councils, you also have boards that look at your planning consent before you get permission. But still, the onus is on the public to be up to date with these laws. I mean, many people do not know about this, this Control Act. Some don't even know the procedures of getting permission. Many developers don't even know what things the town councils look at when they're giving you building permission, when they're giving you restrictions on what to develop on your site.
Well, so many building owners have been accused of hiring unskilled labor in a bid to, you know, circumvent the high costs. And these unskilled workers do not know how to mix the concrete right there. Like, is it true that the way you mix concrete will actually, the way you mix the concrete right there will actually affect the way the building holds, the strength of the building? Is it true?
Yeah, you see, the strength of concrete comes from the ratio of the mix. So you have water, you have stones.
So you don't just
cement,
get the concrete and the water and just mix it together?
Yes, there's a particular ratio that you need to put together to get the required strength. And of course, if you miss out maybe 1 bag of cement instead of 2, you compromise your strength. And the issue of qualified builders is important. You need to have the right foremen on your construction site. They need to be skilled. As I mentioned earlier on, somebody who has done a single-story building shouldn't be the same person doing a 5-story building. They need to have that expertise and experience, and they always need to be monitored. Yeah.
Well, academicians, building professionals, politicians, citizens in general, you know, they know exactly why the buildings are collapsing. Everyone knows why they are collapsing, but then we still see buildings collapse. What are we doing wrong?
I think, first of all, on the part of the public, there is this myth that professionals are costly and expensive, and which is really wrong, because professionals are out there to save your money. They're out there to advise you on how to make your building efficient and sustainable. So the public shouldn't be shy to approach engineers, to approach surveyors, to approach architects. And then, of course, those in public offices, those at the municipal level need to actually do the work. They need to actually go out there and monitor and supervise these construction sites, because there is a code of development. I mean, for every municipal, they actually do a routine of visiting a number of these construction sites. But we also have a number of boards that review construction and that monitor professionals. So engineers, for example, are governed by the Institute of Professional Engineers. Architects are governed by the ARB, and that governs the practice of the architects. So each professional has a code of professional ethics and a duty that they need to abide by in order to serve the public. And if each one plays their role, then I think we'll see a change.
Let's talk about the licensing of these engineers. How do you license the people designing our buildings, and how do you keep out the quacks?
Well, first of all, you need to go through school and study a professional program. And then you practice for, you work for a couple of years, and then you sit another exam so that you can get a practicing license. And the process is fairly rigorous, and it takes quite a number of years before you can actually get a license to practice. And each year you need to renew the practice, so the practicing license. So you still need to meet certain criteria before you can go out there and work. The challenge is that many developers do not go to the practiced and rather the registered and the licensed professionals. Many times we want to take shortcuts, and we go to somebody who doesn't have a practicing license. Or we go to engineers in name, but in theory or in literally, they actually do not have the skills to monitor a project. Yeah.
Well, if traditional engineers never built collapsing buildings, and why do modern engineers today have their buildings collapsing before they even reach home? Is it something to do with the curriculum right there that is too theoretical and it's passing out engineers that are not endowed with the practical skills?
Actually, you would find that most engineers provide a level of safety in every building. I mean, if
but you get my point.
Yes, I get your drift.
The traditional engineers never had their buildings collapsing. Now we have people who are educated with the license having their buildings collapse even before they reach home. Is it an issue with the education system, the curriculum?
No, the education system, I think, is okay. There isn't a problem with the education system. Perhaps one would argue that sometimes many of our graduates are not brought to the realities of the real world scenarios, sometimes the cases. But our training is fairly rigorous and strong. The challenge is that the reality is that when you get your plans and you're on a construction site, sometimes the developers do not follow those plans. Sometimes instead of having a couple of bars that are size X or size Y, they change the bar in a bid to cut down on costs. So I think the challenge really is on the supervision, because many times engineers are trying to provide a good level of safety in every building. They go above and beyond to provide the right amount of steel, the right amount of concrete, the right amount of provisions. But the issue is it followed through on the site? Do they stick to the provisions? Yeah.
So recently, when there was a fire in Chisenyi, police and rescue services right there, fire brigade, they blamed lack of access as a major issue right there. Now, why do we have such developments?
Well, now that is multi-pronged, because that is now looking at the city and development at a bigger scale. And usually when you are developing settlements, you need to provide for infrastructure. You need to provide access to these spaces. In the cases of slums, usually squatters overtake the development and they come in before infrastructure has come in. And yet the right way of development should be that you should have the infrastructure, you should have the roads, you should have water, you should have power before you have the buildings begin to mushroom. And so it's unfortunate that in many of the informal settlements that we have in our cities and in our towns, you have these squatter developments that come up without a thought to where the road should have been. And of course, it presents a challenge for the government and other entities who are supposed to bring in these services and these networks for transport.
Andrew, let's take a look at where we go wrong exactly. Is it during construction, post-construction, or is it during pre-construction, construction, or post-construction? Where do we go wrong?
I think
in those three areas.
It's all the three. First of all, before construction, you need to actually think through your plan properly. That sometimes is not done. Sometimes people don't think through their plans properly, and they come out with plans that are not as efficient or as effective in solving the spatial problems. And then during, or actually before you even get to the construction stage, you need to make sure that your plans are scrutinized. You need to make sure that the authority in that town, for example, KCCA, needs to review and make sure that the plan is safe for public consumption, that you have the right toilets perhaps in place, ramps for those people who are disabled, access for those who are disabled. Those kinds of things are scrutinized at a planning level.
Emergency
is that done?
Exit services?
Exactly. The fire escapes, for example, need to be, you need to provide all those things, and the planning authority needs to scrutinize. Well, in this case, the building committees will actually now scrutinize the plans. And then when you actually go to construction, then you need to have the right team. Do you have the right team in place? Do you have engineers who are qualified? Do you have a contractor who's experienced and who has the right certificates to construct? And during the construction process, are you monitoring the construction process? Are you, for example, carrying out tests on your materials? Some do not know that there exist labs that can check the strength of your concrete, the strength of your bars. Are you checking that? Are you monitoring? Do you have the right methodology? For example, if you're going to dig down a couple of stories down, are you doing it the right way? Are you protecting the soil? Are you keen on safety of your workers? Do your workers have the right gear? Do they have a helmet, gumboots and overalls? Are there safety precautions? Are these things being followed through? So you realize that at every stage, there needs to be checks and balances.
Well, I believe we shouldn't look for people to blame but embark on a complete surgery of this whole system, because we might be fighting the system, the symptoms of this problem, not the disease itself. So, Mr. Andrew, as we wrap up, what are some of the, solutions, to avert this problem, besides the government, doing its part?
First of all, I would encourage the general public to make themselves aware of the laws in place, the variety of laws that govern building development. The recent one is the Building Control Act. Secondly, the public shouldn't be shy to approach professionals. You shouldn't be shy. You shouldn't fear and feel that professionals are unreachable or expensive. But then third, of course, is to follow the regulations. If you're going to build, take your plans to the town council, take them to the municipal, seek advice, seek guidance. And then when you start to build, make sure that the work is being supervised and you're following the building code.
Chairman Research and Development at the Uganda Society of Architects, that is Mr. Andrew Amara. Thank you for having made the time to speak to NTV. The banter has been focused around the collapsing buildings in Uganda. Since 2014, we've been losing the building at least 3 of them, 3 buildings since 2014 up to 2018 right there. Now, he's saying that before you embark on this project, just do some research first in that regard, so that you don't end up in a quagmire that we've seen one too many times. Buildings collapsing even before the engineers get home in that regard. Another issue has been about engineers maybe not being educated enough, but he says that's not an issue. The issue is just getting the requisite people, the right people to do the construction building for you, not the quack ones. So that's how best you can avoid the quack builders in that regard. And that conversation has come to an end. We now take a very short break. We'll be right back with more exhilarating information. Keep it here at Morning at NTV.
You're watching Morning at NTV.